Hello, everyone. My name is Pamela Patnode, and it is a tremendous joy for me to have this opportunity to share with you information that I am really passionate about when it comes to working with our Hispanic and Latino students in our Catholic schools. I am going to share my screen with you, and God willing, the technology works here. But I wanted to first just welcome you. Thank you for participating in this session. And it is my prayer that you will gain some information or something of value that you'll be able to take back to your schools to help the students that you're serving in those schools. So let me work some magic here and see if I can share some slides with you, and that will help to let you see, kind of where we're going here with this presentation today. The title of the presentation is Practical Steps for Positive Gains with Hispanic Latino Students. And there are two things that I want to share with you before I launch into the presentation. The first is you will notice when I'm speaking, you might already have noticed that at times my voice can sound a little bit strangled or choked up. The reason for that is 23 years ago, when I was pregnant with our third, I had meningitis, and the meningitis nearly killed me and our unborn daughter, but by God's grace, we both survived. The meningitis triggered a host of complications throughout that pregnancy, but following the birth of our daughter, who was born perfectly healthy, praise God, as my own health began to improve, I started to notice problems with my voice. The condition is called spasmodic dysphonia. And what that means is that the muscles in my vocal cords are having muscle spasms. And in my case, they contract. And when they tighten, they cut off the airflow. And that's what causes my voice to sound a little bit strangled or choked up at times. The doctors don't know if it was the meningitis that triggered the condition or if it just started at that moment by coincidence. But my hope is that my voice will not be a distraction to you during our discussion today. I've been told that if I don't say anything about it, then all people focus on is what's wrong with that weird lady's voice. They say it can sound like a tremor, it can sound like I'm emotional or nervous. But I've also been told if I tell people what's going on, that within a few minutes, they don't even notice my voice anymore. So my hope is that you won't notice how goofy it can sound at times. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, why I got into this topic, you might be wondering, who is she? And she doesn't look Latina at all. So why is she talking about this topic? And the truth is that sometimes I think God must have a terrific sense of humor that he put the most Scandinavian looking person on the planet to be the one to talk about this topic. Pero la verdad es que he tenido la oportunidad de trabajar con estos estudiantes y bueno, he tenido la oportunidad de vivir con familias de México, familias de España, y tengo un amor para estos estudiantes y sus familias, y por eso trabajo con ellos. So really, I just have such a love for this student population. I speak Spanish. I've worked with Hispanic Latino students for a number of years, and have such a love for the students, their families, their culture. And so anyway, that has something to do with why I got into this work. But what are we going to do today? Well, today what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about how I got into talking about this topic. We will talk about the definition of an English language learner, at least for this conversation today. We will talk a little bit about some background on what's happening in our nation and in our Catholic schools regarding the Hispanic Latino student population. We'll talk about important ways to help these students, and we're going to go from the realm of theory into the day-to-day practical things that we can be doing in our schools to help support these students. So the first question is, why did I decide to study this topic? I was at the time that I actually got into really researching this, I was in a doctoral program, and I was actually thinking of doing something different for my dissertation at the time. I have training in other learning challenges like dyslexia and dysgraphia and mental health issues, and I was thinking I was probably going to go in that direction with my dissertation. However, because I do speak Spanish, I was invited a number of years ago to join or to accompany a Latino student and his family as they went to their parent-teacher conferences, and I served as the interpreter for that meeting. And what the headmaster shared with me, and all of the teachers concurred, was that this particular student, who I'm referring to as Pablo, was failing every class. Well, Pablo isn't the only Latino student that I accompanied for the parent-teacher conferences. I also joined another young lady and her family. She had her whole family come to the parent-teacher conferences, but they had just moved to the United States from Mexico, within 3, 4, at most it was 5 years, and the parents did not speak English. I also accompanied another young man, and what was in all of these parent-teacher conferences, the consistent theme was that these students were getting all F's and D's. And so following that evening, I started to have some conversations with teachers, with the person who at that time was our academic dean, and I just started to ask questions. What's going on? You know, what's up with these students? Do they have diagnosed learning disabilities? Is this all related to them being English language learners? What supports are we putting in place to help these students? Do we have any tutoring that we're offering? What kind of training do our teachers have to help support these students? And what I learned at that time in our school was that there were no supports. And so that was really God tapping me on the shoulder to say, guess what? This is now your mission. And it became my mission to support these students, to support their families, the parents, to support our faculty and staff, and to help us I guess, be a school that can be more welcoming and supportive of this particular student population. And it was really an honor to be able to do that for a number of years, a terrific joy. And I have the privilege of continuing to work with some of these students on a regular basis. So I am no longer teaching at that Catholic high school. I now work at the St. Paul Seminary School of Divinity, which is sitting at the University of St. Thomas campus in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm the director for their Catholic School Leadership Graduate Program. And that's a new role, but I still have the opportunity to be working with some of our Latino students, which is a real joy for me. And it's a joy in this Catholic School Leadership Program to help equip our Catholic school leaders with some of the skills and training they need so that they and their schools can better support this student population. So that in a nutshell is how I got into this program. It was through my own work, and then it became part of my doctoral research and studies. It became the focus of my dissertation, and then became the focus of a book that the National Catholic Educational Association has published called Me Puede Enseñar, which means Can You You Teach Me. And you are welcome to purchase that book through the National Catholic Educational Association if you're interested. If you're in New Orleans, I believe they're going to have copies of the book for sale in person, but otherwise you can go to their website. So that's how I got into this topic. So, but how do we define English language learner? I'm going to kind of move my picture around. I hope it's moving on your camera too, just so it's not blocking the words that we're looking at. This definition is important for our discussion today. An English language learner for our purposes today is a student who speaks a language other than English in the home. And I want to explain with you why that definition is important. Because even if we have a student who, for example, was born in the United States and who may have been attending English-speaking schools for their entire academic career, it's still important to use this definition when referring to our English language learners. And here's why. Even if you're looking at the student who has lived here their whole life long, but if they're speaking Spanish in the home, they will be experiencing some challenges that our native English speakers don't face. So what are some of those challenges? First, for example, if their parents do not speak English, then the amount of support with homework that parents can provide will be limited. And especially when we consider our middle school and high school age students, the support that parents can provide academically, parents who are not native English speakers and who still be struggling to learn English themselves, they simply can't help, because the sophistication in language that is presented in those middle school and high school years just exceeds the ability of many of these parents. So this student will not be able to go home and ask mom and dad to help them with their chemistry homework, for example, or help them write an essay regarding their literature and the reading that they're doing. And so that's just a challenge that these students face that maybe students who come from English-speaking homes don't have to worry about. Another challenge when you're dealing with students who are speaking a language other than English in the home, not only is the support that the parents can provide going to be more limited, but it's also possible that the sophistication, the acquisition of academic language that these students have achieved might be limited, and yet also might be disguised because their conversational language might be just flawless. It might be very, very good. And so we as educators might be fooled into thinking that their overall academic language and the level of sophistication is at a level higher than what it really is. And this especially becomes apparent, again, in those middle school and high school years, when the level of sophistication of the language is at a very high level. And so these students who are speaking another language, and for our purposes today, we're talking about Spanish, if they're speaking Spanish in the home, over the course of their lifetime, they are not having conversations about the news or current events or religion or academic subjects in school or relationships or whatever. They're not having those conversations in English, which might thwart their acquisition of the English language when it comes to those types of topics. So that's just something else to keep in mind, that these students may face challenges that people coming from natural English, speaking homes do not have to overcome. And then in the book, I go into greater detail about this later in the presentation. We'll also just talk a little bit about the challenges of parental involvement in a student's education and what that looks like when you're dealing with different cultures and when you're dealing with parents who might be struggling with the language. And so all that to say is that even if a student has been born in the United States and they're attending English-speaking schools their entire career, if they're speaking Spanish on a regular basis in the home with their families, by the middle school and high school years, we still want to be sensitive to that they may still be struggling to really learn this academic language that's needed at the middle school and high school level. Okay, so this is some background information that you may or may not be aware of related to English language learners and Spanish-speaking English language learners. So English language learners are the largest and fastest growing student population in the United States today. And among this population, 80% of them are speaking Spanish in the home. And of those, 50% come from families that identify as Catholic. This third point is also important for people to recognize that the Hispanic Latino English language learner is among the most at risk for academic failure in American schools. That comes as a surprise that it's actually this student population who is most at risk for academic failure. Some other interesting highlights, I guess, are Catholic schools are beginning to invest in recruitment efforts among Latino families, especially in those the urban areas. And this can pose a real challenge for a Catholic school who may not have the training or the resources to know how to effectively serve this student population. Now, this third point is a statistic that many people may have heard, and it was really part of the impetus for me in diving in deeper into this student population and ways to better serve these students and their families, because the statistic says that of Spanish-speaking students who attend Catholic schools, they are 42% more likely to graduate on time than their public school peers, and 2.5 times more likely to graduate college. When I came across that statistic, the first question I asked was, why? What are Catholic schools doing to have historically achieved this level of success? Because I was working with this student population, and at the time I happened to be working in a school that had no supports in place to serve this student population. So I needed to know, what should I be doing? What can we as the school be doing to better support these students? And so these were the questions that I started asking. And I started asking it not because of doctoral research and my dissertation work. I started asking it because I had students sitting in front of me that I knew needed support. And I wanted to help these students, and I wanted to help their families. And so I said, what are these Catholic schools who seem to be having this success? What are they doing to achieve this success? And what practices provide the most help to these students? Because I knew at the school where I work, which does serve a different student population, right? We're not in the upper echelons. One of our missions at the school where I served was to keep tuition affordable, which meant we were drawing from a different socioeconomic population than some Catholic schools might. So we had limited resources. I knew we couldn't do it all. So I wanted to know, well, what are the most effective practices that we could be implementing in our school to better serve these students? What I learned is really not a surprise coming from Catholic schools. I learned that the most important ways to help Hispanic Latino English language learning students succeed in our school are right here on this chart. And we begin by caring for the whole person, which is absolutely consistent with the mission of Catholic schools. If you read any church document that talks about Catholic education, 100% of them will say that the mission of the Catholic school is to support the whole student, to form the whole person while leading that student to Christ. But then I started asking the question, okay, I've heard that before. I've even heard that in public education, that serving the whole student is important. How do we do that? What does that look like? And what I learned in talking with schools across the country and then spending a significant amount of time in one urban, highly successful school with a very large Hispanic Latino student population, what I learned is that the two pillars that hold up this mission of caring for the whole person, the two important pillars include having support structures in place that are very practical and relationship building practices that are in place. And the foundation of that then is serving these students with the support and the relationship building practices throughout their academics, their cultural, spiritual, student validation areas, and also college and career readiness. Now, I know sometimes when you see college and career readiness, you can think, oh my goodness, are we going back to the Common Core? No, that's not what this is. And in the book, I go into greater detail, but we'll talk about it a little bit later in this presentation too. Just what does it mean to have a college-going culture in our schools? How can we support this student population in particular in their vocation after high school? And we'll get into that in a little bit here. Okay, so let's start right with this mission of Catholic schools is the formation of the whole person. And in the Sacred Congregation for Catholic Education's text, The Catholic School, we have this quote, which is representative of all church documents that are talking about Catholic education. The school must begin from the principle that its educational program is intentionally directed to the growth of the whole person. That's what we're looking at. We're not looking at some narrow niche that says, okay, our whole focus this year is going to be increasing reading scores on the standardized test, or where our whole focus is we're going to become a STEM school or whatever. I mean, those are important initiatives that come below this overarching mission of forming the whole person. So what does that look like? To form the whole person, we need to have structural supports in place, and we need to have relationship building practices in place. And I want to begin first with relationship building. And it's important that relationship building is the first thing that we will address. When we're talking about relationship building practices, here are some, I guess, just practical examples of things that you can do to strengthen relationships with your students, to strengthen the relationships between faculty and staff, and to strengthen the relationships between teachers and parents, or the school in general and parents. The first thing is simply get to know your students. It seems so obvious, right? But have conversations with them. Ask what they did over the weekend. If they're on an athletic team or they're involved in drama or other extracurriculars, ask about those activities. And even better, if you can, go to one of their games. Go to their drama performances or the band concert or, whatever, the debate club, whatever the math league, whatever it happens to be. Attend and show support for the students. The other point, number 2, it says learn about the students' cultures. We cannot be colorblind. That's a comment that we used to hear a number of years ago, where people who were sincere in saying they aren't racist, they would sincerely say, I'm colorblind. I don't even notice the color of their skin. What I notice is who they are as a person. And although that the intent is good and their hearts are in the right place. The reality is we do need to notice the color of skin of our students. We do need to notice their culture, and we need to affirm them. We need to learn about their cultures. We can't ignore them because our students are bringing their cultures with them into who they are as people and how they experience our classrooms and how they experience adolescence and school. And so we need to be aware of these cultural differences. I go into great detail in the book. I'll touch on it a little bit briefly today. But we need to get to know our students and the cultures from which they come. We want to validate our students, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, what that can look like both inside and outside of the classroom. We want to take a look at how are we communicating with our students, with their families, with one another in the school. We want to consider professional development in the areas of relationship building. We really want to have strong relationships within our school. That's the foundation for everything else. In fact, in this text by Sergiovanni and Green, titled The Principal Shift, in here, Sergiovanni and Green says that school success also involves learning and cultivating relationships. Learning builds the capacity of teachers to know more about their work, to figure out how to create better pathways to success, and to improve practice as a result. Relationships, as pointed out earlier, provide the support that teachers need to come together as a community of learners and a community of practice. It also says that trust comes first, then vision, and then strategy. But trust is only developed when we have strong working relationships between our faculty and our staff, between the school and parents, and between teachers and their students. And if we don't have these strong relationships in place, we will lack the trust that's needed for learning. Relationship building is profoundly important. Okay, how else can we serve these students? We can do so with some very practical supports. When we look at academics, for example, here are some things that successful schools with large populations of Hispanic Latino students are putting into place. This first one is so interesting because this was an example that came way before the pandemic ever hit. Okay, but some of the learning from this 9th hour example is stuff that we've since learned because of the pandemic. What does this mean? It means some of the schools that I spent time in actually schedule a final hour of the day. They extend the school day by about 40 to 45 minutes so that they can have, in this case, it was the 9th hour. Maybe for your school, it would be the 7th hour or the 8th hour. They extended the school day, and all of the students, it's basically a mandatory study hall, and all teachers are on deck. They have tutors at the ready. It's an opportunity for students to get started on their homework, or to make up tests, or to meet with a teacher, or to meet with a tutor, or to do a group project with other students in the class, right? And get started on that project, or to make up a lab, whatever it is. But there's so much benefit in this, especially with our English language learners. And here's why. First of all, when you're at the school, what do you have access to? You have access to technology. You have access to the internet, right? And that's something that prior to the pandemic, a lot of people were not aware of, that when we're dealing with the Hispanic Latino student population, many of them do not have technology, the laptops and the Chromebooks and the iPads or whatever it is in their own homes, nor do they have internet. And so having an opportunity to get homework done at school where they can use the school technology and the school internet is profoundly important. What else do they have access to during this school this, kind of mandatory study period during the day. They have access to peers, they have access to their teachers, they have access to tutoring. The other thing that's important when you're dealing with this student population, and this kind of goes into the realm of cultural differences that we'll talk a little bit about today, and there's more detail in the book. But culturally, because the Hispanic and Latino students come from what is more of a collectivist, a community worldview, versus the American individualistic worldview, what that means is that for these students in their culture, the community needs, the needs of the community trump the needs of the individual. And so that means for a student living in a family, the needs of the family come before the needs of the student. And when you're dealing with a middle school or a high school age Hispanic Latino student, for example, when that student goes home, they may have responsibilities to the family that they need to attend to. They may be responsible for making dinner. They may be the ones responsible for helping their younger siblings with their homework. And it is expected that they will perform these tasks before they get any of their own homework or studying done, especially if they have parents that are working multiple jobs, for example. So these students really need to step up and help within the family. And that means they may not have time or opportunity when they get home to complete their schoolwork. So building in time in the school day for them to get the work done while having access to technology, to the internet, to tutors, to teachers, to peers is profoundly important. Some of the other ideas here too might work for your school, they might not. Standards-based grading has proven effective for many of these students. Professional development for the faculty is so important, especially in Catholic schools, right? Because we may just not be able to have a whole special ed department at our school. We may not have any specialists in our middle schools or high schools who are able to work with our students who learn differently. And so being able to provide some professional development for the faculty so they have some understanding of how to differentiate their own instruction, how to make accommodations, how to, when necessary, provide modifications, especially when we're dealing with the world of IEPs and 504 plans. All of this is so important. I want to explain something else, the other reason it's important. I'm a Benedictine Oblate. That's what that OBLSB stands for after my name. I've been asked that before, and it just means that I'm a Benedictine Oblate. And I was at a meeting one time, and I was talking with a group of women. Some of them were religious sisters, and others of us were Oblates. And one of the religious sisters was mentioning that she had spent 50 years working in a school for children with Down syndrome. And one of the other ladies, Oblate, sitting at our table exclaimed, "Oh my heavens, you spent 50 years working in a school for children with Down syndrome. You must have incredible patience." And Sister Georgianne Burr responded and said, it isn't patience that we need so much as understanding. That comment has actually been sort of a driving mantra for me since I heard that comment, 10, 15 years ago. It's understanding that we need, whether we're working with English language learners, whether we're working with students who have diagnosed learning disabilities, whether we're working with students who have mental health challenges that are affecting their academics or their behavior. It's understanding that we need, because without that understanding, not only do we not have patience or lose our patience, but we can also make inaccurate and inappropriate judgments against those students. And so even just some general professional development. We don't need all of our faculty and staff to be experts in the world of special education, but my goodness, they need to have at least a general understanding of the needs of these students and how, ways that we can meet those needs. And then, of course, provide tutoring for struggling students. One of the ways that we did this at a school that I worked at previously, that school was attached to a parish, and we reached out to the parish community, excuse me, for volunteers. And we had wonderful volunteers come through, and they were all Virtus trained, right? But some of them had been chemists in their professional life, but they'd retired and they were looking for meaningful volunteer work. And so they were able to tutor our students in science. We had wonderful volunteers step forward from the parish community. And so when you're looking at tutoring, it doesn't necessarily have to be a paid position, but be creative on where you can reach out to find some really qualified volunteers. And again, don't lower the standards. These are intelligent students. They're highly capable students, but they do need some supports put in place. Okay, cultural supports. How can we support these students culturally? First, look for ways to validate the students' cultures. And there's lots of ways we can do that by including Spanish language in the Mass, in songs, in artwork around the school, maybe celebrating certain festive days with the students, but also asking the students about their cultures. What do you do to celebrate Our Lady of Guadalupe? Or what does your family do? For example, even just those conversations are interesting for us to learn, but they also show the student that you care about them and you are interested in them and in their families and in their culture. Encourage your faculty to learn about the culture of the students and be sensitive to the fact that a student from Mexico has a different culture than the student from Costa Rica. They may share some similarities and share some similarities in their language, but they also have some differences, and it's just sort of interesting to learn what those differences are. Spiritual supports. This is so important because there's emerging research now that is showing that individuals with a strong spiritual life and schools that have a strong spiritual life tend to result in higher academic gains. I find that so interesting because tragically, many of our Catholic schools have felt that they need to abandon their spiritual life, abandon their Catholic culture in favor of what the local public school is doing down the street for the whole purpose of increasing test scores and learning among their students. And yet the emerging research is showing that just the opposite is true. Now, of course, we're not going to include spiritual practices because our goal is academic gains, right? No, our goal goes all the way back to the mission of Catholic schools, which is the formation of the whole person while leading that person to Christ. That's our main mission as Catholic schools. And you'll look at this bottom point that says, review the role that faith plays within your school. Could an outsider recognize that your school is Catholic, other than the name of your school, right? If you're using only texts that come from the public school world, if you're not praying before classes or on a regular basis, if you're not practicing the sacraments and giving the students opportunity for confession, for example, at the minimum during Advent and Lent, if you're not holding school masses, it's really an opportunity to pause and say, how can we get back our Catholic culture and reintroduce that? It's so important, not only as Catholic schools and our mission, but it's important for these students. And then you can look for ways. A lot of our Catholic high schools have students who come from a different faith tradition, but there are still ways that you can support one another through shared values, right? And service opportunities, for example. Even if not every student is Catholic, we can all still support the poor. We can support caring for the environment. We can support caring for the unborn, for the elderly and the infirmed, right? And so there's a lot of values that we can still support together through service opportunities and through prayer, even if you have students who come from different faith traditions. We're almost to the end, and I so appreciate you hanging with. This is a lot of information. Like I said, there's more of it in the book, and I hope that it's not too overwhelming or too boring, actually, for you today. So finally, we get into the world of student validation and then this college and career readiness, a college-going culture within the school. What can we do in these two realms to support our students? So in the realm of student validation, I really get into this in greater detail in the text, but having a positive approach to discipline, it can be very influential in the lives of these young people. Looking at it from, rather than just always being so punitive, up straight to detention you go, looking at ways to provide more training, really, and striving for progress over perfection. But this, of course, requires the buy-in from the faculty and the staff. And I don't want to suggest for a minute that if a student does something really, really grievous, like bringing a weapon on campus or something, obviously there are situations that have to be addressed immediately and firmly. But for the day-to-day misdemeanors that creep up in the life of adolescents, having a positive approach that really focuses on training, virtue development, it takes longer, but can be more effective in the long run. And then looking for ways to affirm students, whether that's formally through different award presentations and events throughout the year, whether it's informally and in class and out of class. And there was one teacher who said to me, and I just thought this was spot on. She said, I don't want my only communication with parents to be when the student is doing something wrong. And I think as teachers, that's so important for us to remember. It is so meaningful as a parent to receive an email from a teacher affirming your student, and celebrating even the smallest successes. An email saying, I so appreciate how your student helped another student today. I just wanted you to know what a joy it is to have your student in class. Or 3 days in a row, your student has turned in their homework on time. It's just so exciting. Couldn't be more thrilled. It's really, it helps teachers to be aware, to start looking for the positive as well, because as teachers, sometimes we very easily can find the mistakes. And it's a beautiful reminder to, in addition to the mistakes, we also want to call out the good. And then college and career readiness. So what does this mean, especially when we're looking at this Hispanic, Latino, English language learner population? How can we support these students? One of the things that many of these successful urban schools are doing is holding parent nights. And they have these evenings in Spanish and in English. And they begin in the 9th grade year. And they lay out a pathway so that the parents are aware of what the process looks like from 9th grade all the way through graduation. And they'll talk about things like, this is what you can anticipate if your student is interested in going to a trade school or to a vocational school of some sort, a community college. If they're interested in a 4-year college, maybe they're interested in the military Maybe they're interested in a religious vocation. And so the parents, when their students are in ninth grade, have this long-term understanding of what the steps are to take during the high school years, because most of these parents will not have attended a college in the United States. They may have attended a university in their own country, but they will not be necessarily familiar with the university system, the community college system, the military, the religious vocation system here in the United States. So these parent nights are profoundly important. Secondly, they'll host FAFSA nights, and that allows parents to have a translator on hand to help them in their own language, to walk them through the steps of completing a FAFSA. It'll provide that technology again and the internet, and just a network of people that they can ask questions of, because going through the FAFSA for the first time can be intimidating for all of us, really. Having school signage so that the students regularly can see these pathways to college or to military or religious vocation. Having school-sponsored college visits is very helpful, especially for parents who are unfamiliar with how to set up something like that. Having alumni come back and talk to the students about their experience can also be very influential for these young students. They see, oh, I remember this guy, and if he can do it, I can too. And then finally, this is a real luxury, but some of the schools that I talked with actually have a college counselor on staff, okay? So first of all, having a college counselor on staff, but some of them also had, as a part of these college counselors, a staff person dedicated to reaching out to the alumni who were now in college or in the military or in the community colleges, and to regularly stay in touch, to make sure that they're doing okay, and to help them to stay in college, right? And find the supports they need there. So that's a lot of information, right? Where to begin? Where to begin? First, it's with prayer. And I say that with all sincerity. Pray. And ask what God is wanting of you. Ask what students need your help in the school, or ask God what ways you can serve this student population, or based on the information that you learned today. And I recommend that you start small. Choose one relationship building practice that you could implement, or choose one practical support from each category to implement. Or just choose one student who needs some help and be the one to step in and advocate for that student. So I know, I mean, it's overused, that quote by President John F. Kennedy when he said, don't ask what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. In a way, it's considering this student population. And before we begin, what can my, with the question, what can my school do, or what can my faculty do, or what should the leader of the school do? Ask the question, what can I do? How can I help? And if there's one student that I just start to reach out to and support in whichever way they need support, that can make a huge difference in the life of that one student. You might help that student reach graduation who otherwise wouldn't have achieved that goal. And think of the effects of that, the long-term effects of graduating from high school, and maybe even going on to a community college or a four-year college or the military, religious vocation, whatever it is. That will have lasting positive effects for generations to come. And then find one other person in the school who's willing to partner with you and work together to figure out ways that you can better support your struggling students. Archbishop Fulton Sheen once said, any forward movement that will save society is never a movement of the masses. It is the movement of a creative minority. pray, and start small. I really thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you today. I mentioned that I have a book, Me Puede Enseñar. It's right here. Me Puede Enseñar. You can order it on the website at the National Catholic Educational Association. If you are interested in learning more about these practices or just having them all down in writing, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at the St. Paul Seminary School of Divinity at the University of St. Thomas. I would be thrilled to talk with you. It is such a joy and an honor to be presenting this, and honestly, to be joining you in this important mission. So thank you again. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I just wish you a blessed remainder of the school year and continued work. So thank you again.